Good morning everybody, it's Chris here. Today we are brewing, and we are brewing with a purpose. To have a nice beer in October you need to start a little bit earlier. So we're doing an Octoberfest beer, which is traditionally called a Marzen, which refers to March. And yes, it's the 27th of June. It is bright and early on a cold winter's morning. Good time to brew a lager because it needs to be cold. So while the coffee machine is heating up, and also the interaction in the brewing crew, we are going to have a look at the recipe for today. Today you'll see we are doing a Marzen, but it's a Julienne de Marzen. It's a Marzen in July. And this is what we'll be following for the day. This is developed on a software that I do, and it takes a bit of research and ultimately just penning down your recipe. I'm brewing with a Grainfather, which is a New Zealand, I think New Zealand or Australian designed brewing system. Our brew water is in there. We have good old clean Lesotho water that comes via the Val Dam, 19 liters, and we are just heating it up to mash temperature, which will be a 67 today. 67 degrees means we retain a little bit of sweetness from the sugars, but we will still get the alcohol content that we require. So we get our sugars for the beer from the grains. Today's recipe, we are going to use Munich malt 2.5 kilos, which is this one. We are going to use a we are going to use a pale ale malt, which is just a malted barley. That's been crushed for brewing purposes. We are going to use a bit of leftover melanoidin that I have. This one will give a bit of a bready taste, change the color slightly, and we'll also use a bit of caramel helles. This will add a slight sweetness to the beer and a little bit of caramel flavor. It will also change the color a little bit. So the alcohol is generally produced by the Munich malt and also by the pale malt. If you drink a castle lager, SAB has a pale malt of their own, and that is the bulk of castle, is this bag. Because we're doing a German lager, we are using a bit more German grains to give the bready taste of the German lager. So let's get going with the beer making. We want to extract the sugars from the grains, so we have to draw it like a tea. So we're adding the grains into the water, weighing the grains so that you get the correct amount of sugar, and that will ultimately determine the alcohol content of the beer. Then on top there's a plate that goes on to make sure that you don't disturb the grain bed while you are circulating the water. So you set the temperature, you start circulating the water, and your beer starts, the water starts extracting the sugars from the grains. A pre-boil gravity that we check, 1050 in this case, it will give us an idea of where the sugars are going to end. We are cleaning our fermentation tanks, the carboy, a plastic carboy in this case. After about an hour or 90 minutes of mashing, you've got the sugars out of the water, and then it's a question of draining the water and washing the last little bit of sugar from the grains. Once that is done, you boil the beer. Want to sterilize it, but also to add some flavor when you add hop pellets. These hops are dry hop pellets, and they give bitterness and flavor to the beer. In this case, we used Hallertau, which is a noble German hop. Once the boiling is done, you want to cool it down with a cooling coil in this case, and again take a SG reading so that you can establish the final gravity of the beer, and that will give you a sugar content, and you now will be able to determine from this point how much sugar have been converted. So we ended up at 1058 approximately, and that is the amount of sugar. It's cooling the beer down before we can pack it away. Once it's cool enough, it goes into the carboy, and from this point into a controlled environment to cool down. A lager, the word means that we are packing it away in a cave filled with snow typically, or a very cold place, lagering. So lagering is a process of storing a beer and fermenting it at very cold temperatures. So in this case we do it in a fridge with a temperature control module. You see at the top of the fridge, where we keep the temperature for this specific yeast down to about 13 degrees Celsius. Once the beer is stabilized and everything is nice and cool, we add the yeast, and the yeast will now eat the sugar and it will produce the alcohol. So let's check in with this guy and what he has to say about the beer. Nice, bready, malty, a little bit of caramel. Bitterness is just right. I also asked the passerby what she thought.
That's lekker.
And that's how you make a beer. At the moment it's fermenting in the fridge, and you can see the bubbler pushing through, so that's carbon dioxide pushing out from the beer. It's a bottom fermenting beer, so all the yeast is at the bottom, and it's nice and controlled. And then what's better than to have some South African olives, your own biltong, and your own sip of beer. If you're interested in this, let me know and I can help you set up. Otherwise, join me for the beer trip in November, and you can taste this beer as we present it on the trip. Have a good day, stay safe, cheers.